Lucas stated his opinion over the vigorous protestations of Rush, his junior officer. At the risk of insubordination, Rush suggested that the Billfish had not only been sighted, but was being actively sized up by the torpedo boat before moving in for the kill. Unlike Lucas, Rush was a battle-tested submariner, having completed 5 war patrols as a junior officer under the command of the legendary William Moke Milliken aboard the U.S.S. Thresher, SS-200. He brought much more experience in combat to the Billfish than any of his senior officers. Standing face to face in the conning tower, Rush emphatically warned his tentative CO, "Either you take us deep or we're dead." Lucas vacillated. He did not issue any orders. Several minutes later, around 1450, Rush's deepest fears were realized. The characteristic pinging sound of active sonar originating from the torpedo boat reverberated throughout the boat and revealed the enemy ship's true intentions. For whatever reason, despite the fact that both the CO and XO were fully aware of the immediacy of the threat, the Billfish lingered at PD, much like a sitting duck. No evasive actions were initiated. The leadership had frozen. Rush did not wait a moment longer. He ordered a full dive on the bow and stern planes. The boat immediately headed down for the security of deeper waters. At 200 feet, the crew of the Billfish could hear the telltale swoosh, swoosh of the screws of the torpedo boat passing directly overhead. The urgency to get as deep as possible in the shortest amount of time was guided by the notion among fleet boat veterans that the worst hit from a depth charge was from one that detonated below the hull. So with no regard as to the noise they were generating from propulsion, the Billfish went to maximum submerged power to try to quickly achieve a depth of 400 feet, equivalent to the test depth of a Vallejo-class submarine, the maximum depth at which a submarine is designed to safely operate under normal peacetime circumstances. A few moments later, everyone aboard the Billfish could hear the unmistakable sounds of 6 depth charges being released in rapid succession and entering the water above them. The submarine was around 250 feet at the time, meaning that within 60 seconds, the first depth charge could explode in her vicinity. Everyone braced for possible impact. The sense of dread was palpable. The first depth charge exploded close by on the starboard side. The concussion was massive, sending men airborne as the deafening boom swept through the boat. Before anyone could gain their bearings once more, after experiencing the equivalent of a heavyweight boxer's punch to the face, a second depth charge detonated at even closer range along the starboard side. The explosion was close enough for the men to hear the distinctive click of the released firing plunger, causing the detonator to strike the booster. The damage to the submarine was immediate and extensive, and several men were injured. The chief of the boat, Cobb, Emmett Carpenter, was standing in control when the blast struck. He was knocked violently to the deck. An amateur boxer with an impressive physique, Carpenter was momentarily dazed, but he peeled himself right back up as if he were getting off the canvas during a bout. He manned his station for the duration of the ordeal. The port main motor was blown right off its mounts as the welds failed. One of the diesel fuel ballast tanks was breached, and a steady trickle of oil began to rise to the ocean surface. The packing around a stern tube shaft, connecting the main motor to the propeller, sprang a small leak, and seawater began to stream inside the lower level of maneuvering in the engine room. The depth was around 270 feet as the boat struggled to continue her downward trajectory. 3 more depth charge blasts occurred in rapid succession. All produced substantial additional damage. The deflections induced by the explosions temporarily opened up a weld seam on the upper hull above maneuvering, and seawater poured inside and drenched those men standing watch there as well as the electrical equipment. A prolonged soaking would short out the panels and incapacitate the boat. Fortunately, the hull opening closed itself after a few moments. A good analogy for hull deflections is a plastic ruler. It can sustain mild to moderate bending and remain intact, but a severe bend results in irreversible breakage. The 6th and final depth charge of the initial barrage exploded near the stern and opened up a gaping hole in one of the after torpedo tubes. Seawater gushed inside and filled the after torpedo room quickly, first ankle deep, then knee deep. As men worked furiously to plug the holes with whatever was available to them, Lieutenant Rush remained in control and guided the boat down to 400 feet. The salvo was done, for now, The Japanese captain would pause to determine if depth charges had destroyed the submarine before ordering another barrage. The flooding in the aft torpedo room was so voluminous that the Billfish could not achieve a zero bubble. The stern was weighed down by the floodwater. Meanwhile, the clock passed 1500, meaning the boat had been submerged for about an hour. In time, the battery and oxygen constraints would force the Billfish's hand, but for the time being, the crew still had time to escape its surface predators. Rush ordered the boat all ahead 2/3. He knew that the batteries would be quickly drained by the one operating starboard main motor, but he realized that it was imperative that the Billfish leave the initial bombing radius. Rush had taken control of the boat without the slightest hint of rebuke from either the CO or XO, who remained in the conning tower above him. The bombardment seemed to further exacerbate the indecisiveness and withdrawal of the CO. He said nothing and offered no counsel on an escape strategy. As the OOD and second in command, the XO tried to discharge his duties, but he had become stricken by the poor air quality and struggled to breathe. He was not in good physical health before the incident, and his respiratory difficulties rendered him out of commission as well. The atmosphere that the men were breathing was growing more toxic by the minute, and Rush knew that the situation was very dire. He wondered, where were the other senior officers? That question was answered a couple of minutes later when the officer, who was third in command, came storming into control with a maniacal look on his face. The man was delirious. At first, Rush thought he was probably injured, but he soon realized that the officer had simply snapped. The pharmacist's mate was summoned to administer a sedative, and the panic-stricken officer was successfully knocked out. Rush took stock of the situation. The CO had suffered a mental break and was out of commission. The XO was fighting to catch his breath and remain conscious, and the third in command had just been given a tranquilizer. Rush realized that he had become the de facto commander for the duration of the ordeal. If the Billfish was going to survive the ordeal, it would be up to Lieutenant Rush and the rest of the crew to step up and fight for their lives. After a brief lull in the constant din of explosions, the awful sounds resumed at a greater distance. The quick thinking by Rush had bought the Billfish some time. Meanwhile, Chief Electrician's mate John Rendernick was busy repairing the dislodged port main motor. He used a hydraulic jack to prop it back into position. Rendernick's improvisational skills also proved helpful in stemming the seawater intrusion in the aft torpedo room.